for being with me today. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your work with bioethics. Can you tell me how bioethics fits in with big data?
Sure, it does in actually a number of different ways. Obviously, people are very concerned about issues around privacy and informed consent. And in a lot of ways, there's a real trade-off that everybody's struggling with. We want to make sure our regulations and protections that we have do a good job of protecting subjects' autonomy interests and respect them. But at the same time, the more burdensome we make requirements for things like consent or privacy for that matter, the harder it is to get good research done. And so finding that right balance between those two is a very delicate ethical issue.
So can we get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty about that?
Sure.
Are there types of big data that are being collected that aren't consented for?
Yeah, all the time. So routine uses of electronic health records data, some uses of biospecimens research, and there's a big debate about whether these things require consent, and if so, what kind. The current regulatory system says as long as the information is de-identified, so you can't identify who it is, then it doesn't count as human subjects, and so you don't have to follow the usual kind of protections for doing research on that data or on those samples. It's not clear that that's something that people are very comfortable with, but at the same time, they may not understand the trade-offs. So we've been doing a lot of research where, for example, we've been telling people about the trade-offs and seeing whether or not they cared that much about consent rather than the importance of letting the research go forward, and also whether certain kinds of oversight might ameliorate the concerns about consent, as well as whether or not if we had a way for them to get information returned to them or websites for them to find out what the results of research was, that would serve in, again, to make up for differences in specific consent.
So what do the people think? What have you heard?
Well, so far we're just at the qualitative research stage, and I haven't moved on to the quantitative stage yet. We're actually going to be partnering with a biobank that's being formed to do a large 2x2 randomized trial to see whether or not certain kinds of information make a difference for rates of participation. But one thing that we have heard very loud and clear is lots and lots of patients both want consent, they want to be asked, they want to have the ability to know what's going on, and lots of patients want the research to take place. They're not always good at understanding that there's often a tension between those two.
Sure.
And a lot of our job is to see what happens when they get that information, where do they come down, on which side, and what can we do to try and figure out ways of trying to maximize the sense that people and the ability of people to buy in and to be told about what's going on without hindering the research.
And one other thing you said that was of interest to me is that it sounds like people are interested in getting some real-time feedback about what their, I suppose, for example, genetic profile is. Is that something we think would be realistic?
It's actually a couple of different things. One is knowing what they did in particular, but it's also more generally knowing how they contributed to science. So if you contributed your samples to research, people want to know, what did you publish out of it? Did you find anything useful? Did you cure anybody? You know, people who are doing this, altruism is a very strong reason for why people are participating in research, and they're worried, am I doing this to really help benefit future patients, or is this really all going to go out to do something that doesn't really make a big difference in the long run but make some money for a company? And so they really getting a better sense for them getting a better sense like what was done with this research, did it lead to something useful, can be really important for a sense of as I say, to build on that sense of altruism and a sense of accomplishment really for the fact that they were able to participate to valuable research.
Almost similar to what we do with, for example, bone marrow transplants. You know when you've made a difference really directly in that case.
That's right, and we do that for all solid organs, for example, as well. Right. So and they do that for everybody involved on the teams in that clinical setting. So having something similar, and I think more and more biobanks are thinking about how to do that and how to make it possible for people to know what their contributions are without doing it in a way that's going to be overly burdensome for the research process. So having websites where the results are posted and letting patients know if their work, or research participants know what those websites are, getting them pinged to say, oh, your samples were part of this study. There are ways of keeping track of all of that in a fairly routinized, automated fashion, but still allowing people to have a sense of the fact that they actually made a contribution.
Keeping them engaged with the research.
Keeping them engaged in research.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem.